The theater lights cast harsh shadows across the makeshift stage. As Raina Ellison stood frozen in position, 17 seniors scattered across fold-out chairs, pretending to watch rehearsal. While scrolling through their phones, the smell of sawdust and privilege hung thick in the air of DuPont Charter Academy's Performing Arts Center, a gleaming monument to donor vanity that cost more than most families made in a decade. Raina had earned her place in the spring production through pure talent, audition after audition, until even Ms. Bellamy couldn't deny her. Lady Macduff was superior to every legacy student who'd tried. But talent didn't buy acceptance in Washington, D.C.'s most elite charter school. At 16, Raina possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that made people uncomfortable. Her dark eyes saw everything, absorbed everything, catalogued the microaggressions and deliberate slights that formed the daily texture of life, where senators, children, and tech billionaires' offspring plotted their inherited futures. Her mother worked in the school library, a detail that branded Raina as definitively working class, in an environment where even custodial staff had graduate degrees. Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jasper McConnell strutted onto the stage, his 6-foot frame moving with lazy confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for anything. The senior class president and star quarterback carried himself like nobility, which wasn't far from the truth. His father, Senator Malcolm McConnell, wielded influence that stretched from K Street to Capitol Hill, and Jasper had inherited that sense of untouchable power, along with piercing blue eyes and $1,000 smile. "Let's try some improvisation," Jasper announced, his voice carrying theatrical projection. "I want to explore the psychological violence between Macduff and his wife, the way power corrupts intimate relationships." Ms. Bellamy nodded enthusiastically, her eyes lighting up with desperate gratitude of someone whose pedagogical authority had been crumbling for years. Student-led initiatives sounded progressive, modern, exactly the kind of innovation that looked good in faculty meetings. "Maybe we should stick to the script," Raina suggested, her voice steady despite growing tension. She could feel the other students' attention sharpening. 17 phones turning toward the stage, recording this moment, preserving it for group chats and social media platforms where reputations lived and died. She glanced toward Ms. Bellamy, hoping for intervention, but the teacher was nodding along, her expression vacant and encouraging. "The script is just a starting point," Jasper replied, stepping closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "Real art comes from truth, from confronting uncomfortable realities." His hands rose toward her shoulders, and Raina instinctively stepped back. But there was nowhere to go. The stage was small, and Jasper was blocking her exit. His smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind his eyes, something that made every survival instinct scream. "You see, this is exactly what I mean," Jasper announced to his audience, his voice rising with manufactured passion. Lady Macduff's weakness, her inability to stand up to power, her complicity in her own destruction. His hands shot forward faster than thought, closing around Raina's throat with practiced precision. Not hard enough to leave visible marks, but firm enough to cut off her air supply completely. The world went silent, except for rushing of blood in her ears. Raina's hands flew to his wrists, but he was stronger than her, athletic and determined, and absolutely confident that this moment would be forgotten by everyone who mattered. Her vision started tunneling, darkness creeping in from the edges, while 17 phones captured every second of her humiliation, her body's betrayal, her complete helplessness in the face of institutional power. She couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there choking, while her classmates laughed and cheered and recorded this violation for posterity. Just as suddenly as it started, Jasper released her, stepping back with theatrical bow, while she collapsed to her knees, gasping and retching, her throat raw and burning. Her dignity scattered across the stage like broken glass. The applause that followed was sporadic, uncertain, some students recognizing they'd witnessed something that crossed a line, others too caught up in the performance to understand what had actually happened. "Brilliant work," Ms. Bellamy gushed, rushing onto the stage, her heels clicking against hardwood. "That's exactly the kind of emotional authenticity we need to bring to this production. The way you explored the power dynamics between the characters, simply extraordinary." She helped Raina to her feet with brisk efficiency of someone eager to move past an uncomfortable moment. Raina stood on shaking legs, her hands pressed to her throat, her dark eyes scanning the faces around her, memorizing every expression of amusement, or indifference, or outright satisfaction. She gathered her backpack with mechanical precision, her movements careful and controlled, because breaking down here would only give them more ammunition, would confirm their assessment that she was weak, emotional, unable to handle the pressure of competing with her betters. As she walked off the stage, the whispers started behind her, the excited chatter of 17 witnesses processing what they'd seen. Some would call it art, others would call it assault, but most would simply call it Wednesday, another day at DuPont Charter Academy, where power determined truth and silence was the price of admission. Raina didn't run. Though every instinct screamed at her to flee, she walked with measured steps through the theater, doors into the marble hallway, past trophy cases filled with ribbons and awards purchased by parental donations. She made it to the bathroom before the tears came, hot and angry and bitter with the taste of helplessness. But as Raina stared at her reflection in the mirror above the marble sink, she made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and did something she'd never done before. She called her mother, not for comfort, not for sympathy, but for something far more dangerous. She called for justice. And Judge Raina Ellison always answered when justice called. The Ellison apartment in Northeast D.C. bore no resemblance to DuPont family's sprawling Georgetown mansions, to bedrooms 800 square feet and furniture that had been beautiful 20 years ago, before single motherhood and law school. Loans had redefined luxury as having enough money for both groceries and utilities. But the walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, legal texts, and poetry collections, and philosophy treatises that spoke to intellectual wealth that couldn't be bought or inherited. Raina sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, her throat still aching from Jasper's assault, her fingers tracing the spine of her grandmother Mina's leather journal, the one possession she'd inherited when the old woman died 5 years ago. Its pages filled with elegant handwriting that documented a lifetime of surviving systems designed to crush her spirit. Her grandmother had been born in 1934 in rural Alabama, had lived through segregation and civil rights and the slow, grinding progress of American justice. Baby girl, her grandmother's words echoed from the journal entry dated September 15, 1962. The world will try to make you small. They'll tell you that your place is in the shadows, that your voice doesn't matter, that fighting back will only make things worse. But silence is the weapon they use against us. Silence is how they maintain power. The day you refuse to be silent is the day you start to win. The front door opened with its familiar creak, followed by the sound of her mother's heels on hardwood. Judge Raina Ellison moved through their small space with the same commanding presence she brought to federal courtrooms, her charcoal suit immaculate. Despite 12 hours of litigation, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a bun that had intimidated defense attorneys across 3 states. She was 45 years old and had spent the last 20 years clawing her way from public defender to federal judge. "How was school, baby?" her mother called from the kitchen, the routine question that usually received a routine answer, "Fine" or "okay," or some other variation of the emotional shorthand they'd developed to navigate the complexity of their lives. Raina had never asked for details about Raina's social struggles, had trusted her daughter to handle the petty cruelties of privileged teenagers the way she herself had handled the institutional racism of elite law schools. But tonight something in Raina's silence made her mother pause. Raina appeared in the bedroom doorway, her dark eyes sharp with the kind of attention that had made her reputation as a judge who noticed everything, missed nothing, and forgot even less. She saw her daughter's posture, the way Raina's hand kept moving to her throat. The journal opened to entries about resistance and survival. "What happened?" Raina asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, her voice shifting from maternal warmth to judicial precision. She'd built her career on reading people, on detecting lies and half-truths and evasions, and her daughter's body language was screaming that something catastrophic had occurred. Raina tried to minimize it at first, the way teenage girls do when they don't want to worry their mothers. "Just some drama at rehearsal, Jasper being Jasper. Nothing I can't handle." But Lila's expression grew more serious with each deflection until finally her judicial voice emerged, the tone that had silenced Supreme Court justices and made federal prosecutors reconsider their cases. "Raina Elizabeth Ellison," her mother said, each word precise as a gavel strike. Tell me exactly what happened today, and don't you dare try to protect me from the truth. I've spent 20 years fighting for justice, and I will not have my daughter diminish an assault to spare my feelings." The word assault hung in the air between them, making what had happened real in a way. That teenage embarrassment and social humiliation, couldn't Raina had been thinking of it as bullying, as cruel theater, as Jasper being a privileged ass, but her mother's legal training had identified it immediately as a criminal act worthy of prosecution. So Raina told her everything, Jasper's hands around her throat, the deliberate nature of the attack, Ms. Bellamy's enthusiastic approval, the 17 witnesses who'd laughed and recorded and done nothing to help the way the theater had erupted in applause. While she gasped for air on her knees, the casual brutality of power asserting itself over merit. Leela listened without interruption, her expression growing colder with each detail. Her hands clenched in her lap until her knuckles showed white against her brown skin. When Raina finished talking, the silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of decision points and consequences that would ripple far beyond their small apartment. "He choked you," Leela said finally, her voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that defense attorneys learned to fear in front of witnesses with a teacher's approval, while being recorded for posterity. "And you think this is something you should handle alone? What do you want to do?" Leela asked, "and before you answer, think carefully about what you're choosing. Silence protects them, not you. Inaction enables future attacks. Doing nothing guarantees that Jasper will hurt someone else, but fighting back means war, and I need to know if you're ready for that kind of battle." Raina thought about her grandmother's journal, about the entries detailing decades of small victories and daily resistances, about the way Minna had refused to be silenced, even when silence would have been safer. She thought about other scholarship students who'd endured similar humiliations, about the system that allowed boys like Jasper to treat girls like her as entertainment. "I want to fight," Raina said, and her voice was steady now, clear and determined. "But I want to do it right. I want to do it smart. I want to make sure they never forget my name." Leela smiled then, and it was a smile that had preceded some of the most devastating judicial decisions in recent memory, a smile that said the game was about to change, and the people who'd been playing by one set of rules were about to discover that a federal judge's daughter played by different rules entirely. "Then we start tomorrow," Leela said, "and baby, when we're done, they won't just remember your name. They'll wish they'd never heard it." Leo Santos had always been invisible at DuPont Charter Academy, the kind of scholarship kid who survived by being useful but never threatening. His neurodivergent brain processed information differently, saw patterns. Others misunderstood systems in ways that made teachers uncomfortable and administrators nervous. He'd built the school's unofficial student app, designed their database interfaces, and fixed their network problems, but remained socially insignificant, a brown-skinned tech wizard from Anacostia who lived with his abuela. But invisibility had advantages, especially when you'd spent 3 years quietly documenting the digital footprints of your wealthier classmates, mapping their social networks, and cataloging their casual cruelties in searchable databases. Leo had watched Raina Ellison navigate the hostile waters of DuPont's social hierarchy, had admired her quiet dignity and brilliant academic performance, had noticed the way she never complained about treatment that would have broken stronger spirits. The morning after the theater incident, Leo arrived at school with a laptop bag containing equipment that would have impressed NSA technicians: Ethernet cables, packet sniffers, wireless network analyzers, and software that could recover deleted files from supposedly secure servers. He'd spent the previous evening in his grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by prayer candles and computer components, planning a digital investigation that would make Edward Snowden proud. Using administrative access he'd quietly maintained for 2 years, Leo penetrated the school's security systems, his fingers flying across the keyboard with the kind of focused intensity that had earned him perfect SAT scores and early admission. To admit he wasn't just looking for evidence of yesterday's assault, he was hunting for patterns, digital breadcrumbs that would reveal the systematic nature of DuPont's enabling culture. The theater hallway cameras had supposedly malfunctioned during rehearsal, according to the incident report that Principal Maris had filed within hours of Raina's assault. But Leo knew that digital files were never truly deleted, only hidden, and He'd designed enough recovery systems to understand how to resurrect supposedly lost data. 3 hours of careful extraction revealed partial footage from a backup server camera angles that captured Jasper's approach, his deliberate positioning, his calculated assault. But the real treasure was buried deeper in the school's digital ecosystem, in private group chats and social media platforms where DuPont's elite students organized their social lives. Leo had spent months infiltrating these networks using fake accounts and social engineering to gain access to conversations that revealed the true nature of privilege protecting itself. The Crown Room check contained 47 members, all seniors, all from families whose annual donations exceeded most people's salaries. The conversation history stretched back 18 months and painted a picture of systematic harassment, orchestrated humiliation, and administrative complicity that would have made civil rights lawyers weep with joy. Tuesday after rehearsal, Jasper had written 3 days before the assault. Time to put the scholarship princess in her place. Anyone recording better get good angles. 17 laughing emojis followed from his accomplices, their digital enthusiasm for planned violence preserved forever in encrypted messages that assumed would never see daylight. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the crown jewel was a video message from Danica Reynolds sent to her private Instagram story. Hours after the assault, Danica's face filled the screen, her platinum hair perfect, her makeup flawless, her expression radiating the kind of satisfied cruelty that came from watching someone else's destruction. "Guys, you should have seen it," Danica's recorded voice said. "Jasper literally choked that library girl until she turned blue, and Bellamy thought it was artistic excellence. I got the whole thing on my phone. This is going to be legendary." She held up her device, showing a clear view of the assault from multiple angles, footage that captured details the hallway cameras had missed. Leo's hands shook as he downloaded the video, his grandmother's warnings echoing in his head, but his determination growing stronger with each piece of evidence. This wasn't just about Raina anymore. This was about a system that enabled violence, protected perpetrators, and silenced victims. This was about 18 months of documented harassment that revealed a pattern of abuse stretching back to the school's founding. His phone buzzed with a text from Raina. "Can you meet me in the library after first period?" And Leo knew she was ready to fight back, but she needed digital weapons, and he was about to give her an arsenal that would level the playing field. He copied everything to encrypted drives, multiple backups stored in different locations, because he understood that powerful people would try to make evidence disappear. Leo Santos might have been invisible at DuPont Charter Academy, but he was about to become the most dangerous person in the building, because he had something the wealthy students had never imagined: their darkest secrets preserved in digital amber, and a federal judge's daughter who was finally ready to use them. Principal Alden Maris had designed his office to intimidate visitors the way medieval castles were built to intimidate invaders. Massive oak desk positioned to catch morning light, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the school's manicured grounds, walls lined with degrees from institutions that mattered, and photographs with politicians whose names opened doors he'd climb from middle-class mediocrity to administrative power. By understanding one fundamental truth, rich parents wanted their children protected, not educated. At 53, Maris possessed the kind of polished emptiness that came from decades of moral compromise. His silver hair was professionally styled, his suit tailored to disguise 20 pounds of administrative weight gain, his smile practiced to convey warmth, while his eyes calculated cost-benefit analyses that would make corporate consultants proud. He'd been expecting this meeting since the moment Ms. Bellamy had nervously reported yesterday's theatrical incident in the drama department. Raina Ellison sat across from his intimidating desk. At precisely 8:15 a.m., her posture straight, her expression calm, her grandmother's journal tucked discreetly in her backpack, along with her phone set to record mode on Leo's advice. She'd spent the previous evening studying her mother's judicial decisions, learning how Judge Raina Ellison dismantled opponents with surgical precision, never raising her voice, never losing her temper, simply presenting facts until truth became undeniable. "Miss Ellison," Maris began, his voice carrying the kind of paternal authority that had convinced thousands of parents to trust him with their children's futures. I understand there was some dramatic tension during yesterday's rehearsal. I want you to know that DuPont Charter Academy takes all student concerns seriously, which is why I've called you here to discuss this matter privately." The word privately hung in the air like a threat. Raina understood that privacy in administrative speak meant without witnesses, without records, without accountability. She could feel her phone recording every word in her backpack while Leo monitored the conversation from the computer lab through the school's internal communication system. "Thank you, Principal Maris," Raina replied, her voice steady and clear. "I appreciate your concern about what happened when Jasper McConnell choked me during theater rehearsal while 17 students recorded the assault and Ms. Bellamy encouraged his artistic expression. I'm here to file a formal complaint and request immediate disciplinary action." Maris's practiced smile flickered slightly at her directness, at the way she'd used legal terminology that suggested preparation and purpose. He'd been expecting tears or stammering, or the kind of emotional breakdown that would allow him to dismiss her concerns as teenage dramatics. Instead, he faced a young woman who spoke with her mother's judicial precision. Now, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I think you're being a bit dramatic about what Ms. Bellamy described as an improvisation exercise. Theater can be intense emotional work, and sometimes students get carried away. I'm sure Jasper meant no harm. He's really quite a remarkable young man, full scholarship to Princeton this fall. His father speaks very highly of him." The mention of Jasper's father wasn't accidental. Maris was reminding Raina of the power dynamics at play. Senator Malcolm McConnell's influence over federal education funding, over charter school licensing, over administrative careers that could be destroyed with a single phone call. Wealth and political connections had protected Jasper through 3 years of minor incidents, and they would protect him now. "Are you suggesting that choking another student until they can't breathe is acceptable behavior if the perpetrator has college prospects?" Raina asked, her tone remaining conversational, even as her words cut deep. "Because I'd like to clarify the school's official position before I speak with law enforcement." Maris's eyes hardened at the mention of police, at the suggestion that this matter might extend beyond his carefully controlled administrative domain. He'd spent 15 years building relationships with local authorities, ensuring that DuPont's minor scandals stayed internal, that wealthy students received guidance counseling instead of arrest records. "Miss Ellison," his voice took on a harder edge, "I think you're overreacting to what was clearly a misunderstanding between classmates. Perhaps if you'd been more collaborative during rehearsals, more open to directorial guidance, these tensions wouldn't have arisen. Your scholarship here is contingent on maintaining positive relationships with your peers and faculty." The threat was explicit. "Now comply or lose your education. Stay quiet or watch your mother's job security disappear." Maris had used this same strategy dozens of times over the years, reminding scholarship students that their presence at DuPont was a privilege that could be revoked for any reason. But Raina smiled then, and it was her mother's smile, the expression that preceded judicial decisions, that changed precedent and ended careers. "Principal Maris," she said, her voice carrying new authority, "are you stating on the record that my scholarship status depends on accepting physical assault from wealthy students? Are you confirming that DuPont Charter Academy operates a two-tiered disciplinary system based on family income? Because I want to make sure I quote you accurately. When this becomes public, for the first time in 15 years, Alden Maris felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crack. He was looking at a 17-year-old girl who possessed weapons. He didn't understand connections. He couldn't fight resources that made his donor base look like pocket change. "Miss Ellison," he said desperately, "perhaps we can reach some kind of understanding. A formal apology from Jasper, maybe some community service, a fresh start for everyone involved." But Raina was already standing, gathering her backpack with movements that spoke of decisions made and bridges burned. "Principal Maris, the time for understanding was yesterday. When you could have protected me, the time for fresh starts was when you could have disciplined Jasper for his previous incidents, but you chose to protect wealth over justice, to enable violence over accountability, and now you're going to learn that some students have more powerful protectors than you ever imagined." The video appeared on every major social media platform simultaneously at exactly 3:17 p.m., uploaded by an anonymous account. called truth_speaker_DC across Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Snapchat. 42 seconds of high definition footage that captured Jasper McConnell choking Raina Ellison while their classmates laughed and applauded, and Ms. Bellamy praised the artistic authenticity of what she was witnessing. Within minutes, the video had been shared 300 times. Within an hour, it had reached 10,000 views. By midnight, it would break 1 million as hashtags began trending organically. Hashtag justice for Raina, hashtag DuPont corruption, hashtag privilege a protectress, hashtag chartershal scandal, spreading across social networks like wildfire, feeding on public outrage at institutional inequality. Danica Reynolds sat in her Bentley in the DuPont parking lot, watching her phone explode with notifications as the video she'd anonymously leaked went viral. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she realized she'd just detonated a social nuclear weapon that would destroy half her social circle while potentially saving her soul. She'd spent 3 years building her influence, carefully cultivating an image of aspirational perfection that had earned her 250,000 Instagram followers. But the night before, she'd stared at herself in her mansion's marble bathroom mirror, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt suffocating. Remembered the way Raina had looked choking on the theater stage, remembered the applause that had followed, remembered her own enthusiastic participation in documenting someone else's assault, and felt something inside her break, something that all her father's money couldn't repair. Her phone rang with her mother's special ringtone, Dr. Patricia Reynolds, calling from her plastic surgery practice with the kind of controlled panic that came from watching your daughter's social media empire collapse in real time. Danica, what is this video that's all over the internet? Your friends are saying you posted it, that you betrayed your own social circle for some scholarship girl. Why would you do something so destructive? Danica closed her eyes, thinking about the private messages she'd been receiving for the past hour. From Jasper's friends threatening social exile, from Emma Cartwright promising to destroy her reputation, from Blake Morrison suggesting that loyalty was more important than truth. Mom, I watched someone get assaulted and did nothing. I recorded it like it was entertainment. I helped turn someone's trauma into social media content, and I can't live with that anymore. She found Raina in the library, surrounded by books that cost more than most families' cars, sitting at a table across from her mother, who wore the kind of severe black suit that suggested federal authority was about to be unleashed. Danica had never spoken directly to the librarian's daughter, had maintained the careful social distance that preserved class boundaries. Raina, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I need to talk to you. Both Ellison women looked up, their dark eyes assessing, calculating, measuring threat levels and potential alliances. Judge Leila Ellison had spent the morning making phone calls that would reshape DuPont's immediate future, while Raina had been receiving messages of support from students across the social spectrum. I leaked the video, Danica continued, her confession spilling out in a rush. I have more footage from different angles. I recorded Jasper bragging about planning this. I have screenshots of group chats where they organize harassment campaigns against scholarship students. I have evidence that could destroy them all. Raina studied her carefully, seeing something desperate and genuine in Danica's perfect facade, seeing a girl who'd spent 3 years playing a role that had finally become unbearable. Why? Raina asked simply. Why are you helping me now? Danica's composure cracked, revealing the person behind the influencer persona, the teenage girl who'd been raised in a moral vacuum and was only now discovering she possessed a conscience. Because I watched you choke, I watched you turn blue, and I cheered, and I filmed it, and I shared it, and I realized that I'm everything that's wrong with this place. That money and privilege turned me into a monster, and maybe if I help you I can find my way back to being human. Judge Leila Ellison had seen many confessions in her courtroom, had learned to distinguish genuine remorse from strategic positioning, and what she saw in Danica Reynolds was authentic transformation, the kind of moral awakening that could shift the entire balance of power. What do you need from us? Leila asked, her judicial voice calm and professional. Protection, Danica said simply. They're going to try to destroy me for this. Senator McConnell has already called my father threatening legal action. Jasper's friends are organizing a social media campaign to discredit me. I need someone who can fight back against that kind of power. Give us everything you have. Raina said, finally, every video, every screenshot, every piece of evidence. And we'll make sure you're protected, because anyone brave enough to risk everything for justice deserves to be defended. As Danica transferred files from her phone to encrypted drives, she felt the weight of 3 years of moral compromise lifting from her shoulders. Outside the library windows, news crews were setting up cameras while federal agents were quietly taking positions, preparing for an investigation that would shatter DuPont's carefully constructed image. The revolution had begun, and it was being led by two teenage girls who'd refused to stay silent. The encrypted flash drive that Judge Raina Ellison slid across their kitchen table looked innocent enough, a small silver device that could hold family photos or homework assignments. But it contained decades of digital dynamite information gathered through federal channels that would expose DuPont Charter Academy's corruption with the kind of surgical precision that had made Judge Ellison's reputation. "This never came from me," Leela said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial ethics and federal law. "As far as anyone knows, you and Leo discovered this information through your own investigation. But baby, what you're about to see will change everything you understand about institutional corruption." Raina connected the drive to her laptop while Leo monitored the transfer through encrypted channels. They'd established using software that would make intelligence agencies proud. The first file that opened contained internal DuPont communications, stretching back to the school's founding in 2005. Thousands of emails between administrators, wealthy parents, and political figures that painted a picture of systematic fraud. The emails revealed a patronage system that sold academic positions to the highest bidder, where teacher evaluations were based on their willingness to ignore wealthy students' misconduct, where disciplinary records were routinely altered to protect children whose parents had made sufficient donations. Principal Maris hadn't just enabled Jasper's assault, he'd spent 15 years orchestrating a criminal enterprise that perverted every aspect of education. "The Reynolds girl is becoming problematic," read one email from 2019. "Between Maris and Dr. Patricia Reynolds, her grades are affecting legacy admissions at Princeton. Perhaps she could benefit from counseling regarding her attitude toward her social betters." The response was immediate and illuminating. "Handle it discreetly, Alden. We can't have scholarship students outperforming our core constituency." But the most damaging evidence was contained in a subfolder labeled Special Considerations, containing communications between Senator Malcolm McConnell and DuPont administrators that detailed a systematic campaign to suppress complaints against Jasper. "My son's college applications cannot include disciplinary actions," Senator McConnell had written 18 months earlier. "Whatever measures are necessary to ensure clean records will be compensated appropriately." The attached receipts showed payments totaling $300,000, disguised as educational consulting fees, money that had purchased not just grade changes, but the systematic silencing of multiple accusers. Leo's fingers flew across his keyboard, correlating financial records with disciplinary reports, revealing a pattern of administrative corruption that stretched far beyond simple grade manipulation. "They've been doing this for years," Raina said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Every scholarship student who complained, every teacher who tried to report misconduct, every witness who came forward, they were all silenced with money or threats or both." Judge Ellison leaned back in her chair, her expression carrying the kind of cold satisfaction that preceded her most devastating courtroom victories. "This isn't just educational malpractice. This is federal wire fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and about 6 other felonies that will put these people in prison for decades. But we need to be strategic about how we use this information." Leo highlighted financial transactions that revealed the true scope of DuPont's corruption: donations that weren't donations, but payments for services rendered, contracts with political figures that violated federal lobbying laws, admissions processes that constituted fraud against universities that trusted charter school recommendations. Senator McConnell used his position to threaten federal funding for any school that disciplined his son. "He's been running protection for Jasper since middle school." Raina thought about her grandmother's journal, about the entries describing systematic oppression that had operated for decades because good people stayed silent, because evidence was buried, because power protected itself through careful management. of information we need to make sure this can't be suppressed if we release this piecemeal. They'll use their influence to contain each revelation. We need to create a data bomb that explodes everything simultaneously. Judge Ellison smiled at her daughter's strategic thinking, recognizing the inherited tactical mind that had been shaped by dinner table conversations about justice and institutional power. Tomorrow morning, I'm recusing myself from any federal cases involving DuPont or Senator McConnell. I'm calling in favors from the Department of Justice. I've been saving for decades, and I'm setting up a legal firewall that will protect both of you from retaliation. As they worked through the night categorizing evidence, building timelines, preparing for a war against institutional corruption, Raina felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy settling on her shoulders, the understanding that some fights choose you, that justice sometimes wears sneakers and carries flash drives and refuses to be intimidated by power. By dawn, they had constructed a legal nuclear weapon that would destroy DuPont's carefully maintained facade. The emergency school board meeting was called for 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening, designed to minimize public attention and maximize administrative control. The 5 board members arrived in luxury vehicles, their faces grim with the kind of desperate determination that comes from watching carefully constructed systems collapse in real time. They'd spent 48 hours fielding angry calls from donors, federal investigators, and news outlets demanding explanations for footage that had made DuPont Charter Academy synonymous with institutional corruption. Principal Maris sat at the head of the polished conference table, his usual confidence replaced by the haunted expression of someone who understood his career was ending. His carefully styled hair showed stress-induced dishevelment. His tailored suit couldn't hide stress-induced weight loss. The man who'd intimidated thousands of students and parents over 15 years had been reduced to administrative rubble by one federal judge's daughter. Raina entered the boardroom at exactly 6 p.m. flanked by Alexandra Chan, a civil rights attorney whose reputation for destroying corrupt institutions had made her legendary among justice advocates. Alexandra's presence wasn't accidental. Judge Ellison had spent decades building relationships with legal warriors who specialized in dismantling systemic oppression, and Alex Chen had volunteered her services. The moment she'd seen the DuPont footage, members of the board, Maris began, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. We're here tonight to address the ongoing disruption caused by certain student allegations. While we take all concerns seriously, the current media attention has created an environment that's detrimental to educational objectives. Therefore, I'm recommending the immediate expulsion of Raina Ellison for violation of our social media policy and persistent disruption of the learning environment. Alexandra Chan rose slowly, her presence commanding the kind of attention that came from winning impossible cases against impossible odds. Before this board votes on any disciplinary action, I need to inform you that federal investigations are already underway. Charges are being prepared, and every word spoken in this room is being recorded for potential use in criminal proceedings. She placed a tablet on the conference table displaying legal documents that made board members' faces go pale. Federal subpoenas, grand jury investigations, Department of Justice civil rights violations that would result in criminal prosecutions. Regardless of tonight's outcome, Ms. Ellison is not here to plead for mercy. She's here to offer you one final opportunity to minimize the federal charges you're all facing by cooperating with ongoing investigations. But Raina stood then, her movement silencing the room with the kind of authority that her mother wielded from the federal bench. Mr. Chen, for 3 years, I've watched this institution protect wealth over justice, enable violence over accountability, silence victims to preserve donor relationships. But tonight, that ends. Tonight you learn that some students have more powerful protectors than you ever imagined. She activated her tablet displaying financial records that made board members realize their corruption had been documented with federal precision donations that were actually bribes, disciplinary cover-ups that constituted fraud, admission schemes that violated multiple federal laws. You can expel me, but you can't expel federal investigations. You can't expel Department of Justice prosecutors. You can't expel the evidence that will send multiple people to prison regardless of my enrollment status here. Judge Raina Ellison entered the boardroom, then her federal robes replaced by a simple black suit. but her authority unmistakable. She'd maintained careful distance from her daughter's case to avoid ethical violations, but tonight she was here as a parent whose child had been assaulted. Ladies and gentlemen, I've spent the last 72 hours reviewing evidence that will reshape charter school oversight. Nationwide, DuPont's closure is inevitable. Criminal prosecutions are certain. The only variable is whether you cooperate with federal authorities. Principal Maris looked around the table, seeing his board members' resolve crumbling, recognizing that their donors' influence couldn't protect them from federal investigations, that their political connections were useless against Department of Justice prosecutors who'd built careers on high-profile corruption cases. Perhaps we should table this expulsion hearing until we've had time to review our legal options. But Raina was already gathering her materials, her expression carrying the satisfied determination of someone who'd achieved strategic victory. Principal Maris, there is no more time. There are no more options. There's only justice, and it's coming whether you're ready or not. As the Ellisons left the boardroom behind them, 5 powerful people sat in stunned silence, understanding that their world had just ended forever. That a 17-year-old girl had just dismantled an empire they'd spent decades building, that federal investigations would soon reveal corruption that made their institutional power meaningless. The FBI raid began at dawn on a crisp October morning, federal agents arriving in black SUVs, with search warrants that covered every aspect of DuPont Charter Academy's operations, from financial records to digital communications to personal files. That would reveal 15 years of systematic corruption. News crews had been tipped off by sources within the Department of Justice, capturing footage of agents carrying bankers' boxes filled with evidence while students and parents gathered in shocked clusters. Principal Maris was escorted from his office in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from a sleepless night spent frantically trying to contact lawyers who'd stopped returning his calls. The man who'd intimidated thousands of students over 15 years looked small and frightened as federal agents read him his rights, while news cameras captured every humiliating detail. "This is a travesty," Senator Malcolm McConnell declared from the steps of the Capitol building, his face red with indignation. "My son is being persecuted by overzealous prosecutors who are more interested in headlines than justice. Jasper is a good boy who made a teenage mistake, and now the federal government is trying to destroy his future." But even as he spoke, his political allies were quietly distancing themselves from a scandal that threatened to engulf anyone associated with DuPont's corruption. Inside DuPont's marble hallways, federal agents methodically dismantled a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for decades. They recovered deleted emails that revealed the true scope of administrative corruption, found financial records that documented systematic bribery, discovered communications that showed political influence being used to silence assault victims. Ms. Margot Bellamy sat in an FBI interview room, her theatrical composure completely shattered as she realized her complicity in covering up multiple assaults would result in criminal charges. Her lawyer had already begun negotiating plea agreements that would require her testimony against higher-level administrators. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt, but they made it clear that my job depended on keeping wealthy parents happy. That reporting misconduct would result in immediate termination." Her confession opened floodgates as other faculty members began cooperating with federal authorities, providing evidence of systematic cover-ups that had protected wealthy students from consequences while punishing scholarship recipients who dared to complain about their treatment. Leo Santos had been granted immunity in exchange for his technical expertise, helping federal agents navigate DuPont's digital infrastructure and recover evidence that administrators had attempted to destroy. Danica Reynolds found herself transformed overnight from privileged influencer to federal witness, protected by U.S. Marshals after her family received threats from Senator McConnell's associates. Her Instagram followers had dropped by half, but for the first time in her life she felt proud of her choices. The hardest part was realizing I'd been raised to see scholarship students as less than human, that my parents had taught me wealth justified cruelty. By evening, DuPont Charter Academy was effectively closed pending federal investigation, its wealthy students transferred to other elite institutions. while scholarship recipients were offered full financial support to attend better schools that valued merit over money. Judge Raina Ellison maintained her judicial distance from the investigation, but privately felt satisfaction deeper than any courtroom victory as she watched federal agents dismantle an institution that had personified everything wrong with American education. "Baby," she said to Raina as they watched news coverage of Principal Maris being led away in handcuffs. "Your grandmother would say this is how justice works, slowly. Then all at once, when good people refused to stay silent, Raina felt the weight of her transformation from victimized scholarship student to federal case catalyst, understanding that her choice to fight back had triggered an avalanche that would reshape charter school oversight nationwide. As federal agents worked through the night cataloging evidence that would send multiple people to prison, DuPont Charter Academy's marble halls stood empty and dark, a monument to institutional corruption that had finally collapsed under the weight of its own moral bankruptcy. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. had seen many high-profile trials, but few generated the media attention surrounding United States v. McConnell, the case that had grown from Raina Ellison's assault into a sweeping prosecution of educational corruption that threatened to expose similar schemes at elite institutions. Nationwide, Senator Malcolm McConnell sat at the defendant's table, his political career already destroyed by revelations of systematic bribery, while his son Jasper faced criminal charges that would send him to federal prison. U.S. Attorney Catherine Mills had built her reputation prosecuting corruption cases, but even she was impressed by the scope of evidence. Federal investigators had assembled financial records proving systematic bribery, communications documenting civil rights violations, testimony from dozens of witnesses who'd been silenced by wealth and political influence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about the corruption of American education by wealth and privilege, about institutions that were supposed to nurture young minds, instead becoming criminal enterprises that sold justice to the highest bidder. When Raina took the witness stand, her testimony cut through defense spin with the precision her mother had taught her. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a style that emphasized her youth, while her voice carried authority that silenced the packed courtroom. "Jasper McConnell choked me until I couldn't breathe, while 17 witnesses laughed and recorded my assault, while a teacher praised it as artistic excellence, while administrators covered it up to protect donor relationships. This wasn't teenage drama, this was institutional violence, designed to teach scholarship students our place." Under cross-examination, defense attorney Harrison Wright attempted to portray her as vindictive and calculating, but Raina's composure never wavered, her answers precise and factual, her demeanor radiating the kind of quiet strength that impressed jury members who recognized authentic courage. Mr. Wright, my only goal was preventing future assaults. My only weapon was evidence of criminal behavior. If exposing the truth attacks superior social standing, then perhaps that social standing was built on foundations that deserve to be destroyed. Danica Reynolds testified next, her transformation from privileged influencer to federal witness, compelling courtroom observers who recognized genuine moral awakening. She detailed group chats that revealed premeditated harassment campaigns, described administrative meetings where complaints were dismissed to protect donor relationships, provided digital evidence that painted DuPont as a criminal enterprise. "I spent 3 years believing that wealth justified cruelty. I was raised to see scholarship students as less than human, but watching Raina choke while we all laughed made me realize I'd become a monster." Leo Santos's technical testimony provided the digital backbone for federal prosecutors, demonstrating how administrators had systematically deleted evidence, manipulated records, and used technology to silence accusers. His presentation of recovered data was so compelling that defense attorneys stopped objecting, recognizing their clients' digital footprints constituted irrefutable proof of corruption. Ms. Bellamy's testimony as a cooperating witness revealed the full scope of faculty complicity in protecting wealthy students from consequences. She detailed pressure from administrators to ignore misconduct, threats against teachers who reported violations, systematic retaliation against anyone who challenged DuPont's culture of impunity. "We were told explicitly that our jobs depended on keeping wealthy parents happy, that scholarship students were expendable if they threatened social harmony. When Jasper McConnell took the stand in his own defense, his testimony collapsed under prosecutorial questioning, his privileged arrogance evaporating, as federal prosecutors dismantled his claims of innocence with digital evidence that proved premeditation. You planned this assault, didn't you, Mr. McConnell? Prosecutor Mills asked, displaying group chat messages that showed 3 days of coordination. It was just theater. I never meant to hurt anyone, Jasper stammered. But his confession came in broken whispers, admissions that he'd wanted to humiliate Raina, that he'd enjoyed choking her. Senator McConnell's testimony was even more devastating as federal prosecutors presented recordings of phone calls where he'd threatened school administrators, demanded special treatment for his son, and used his political office to obstruct justice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, federal crimes that would send both McConnells to prison while triggering congressional investigations that would end multiple political careers. As verdicts were read, Raina sat with her mother in the gallery, watching justice finally prevail over wealth and privilege, feeling her grandmother's spirit in the courtroom, understanding that some victories take generations to achieve but are worth every sacrifice required to reach them. Baby, Judge Ellison whispered as Jasper McConnell was led away in handcuffs. You didn't just win a case, you changed the system forever. 6 months after the trial that sent Jasper McConnell to federal prison and destroyed his father's political career, Raina Ellison stood at a podium in the Hart Senate office building, addressing a packed auditorium of education officials, civil rights leaders, and journalists who'd gathered to witness the signing of landmark legislation that would reshape charter school oversight nationwide. The Ellison Accountability Act, named in her honor, required transparent reporting of all disciplinary actions at federally funded schools, mandated independent oversight of corruption allegations, and established federal protections for student whistleblowers. 6 months ago, I was just another scholarship student trying to survive an elite institution that valued wealth over justice, Raina said, her voice carrying across the auditorium with authority that impressed seasoned politicians. Today we're fundamentally changing how American education protects students from institutional abuse, ensuring that no student's voice can be silenced by someone else's bank account. The audience included faces that had become familiar during months of congressional hearings: Danica Reynolds, now prominent advocate for educational reform; Leo Santos, whose technical expertise had helped draft digital transparency requirements; Ms. Bellamy, whose cooperating testimony had exposed corruption at multiple charter schools; Senator Patricia Williams, the lead sponsor of the Ellison Act, had spent 20 years fighting for educational equity, but had never seen legislation move with the speed that Raina's case had generated. This young woman didn't just seek justice for herself, Senator Williams said, introducing Raina. She exposed systematic corruption that was operating at hundreds of institutions nationwide. Her courage created the political space for reforms that will protect millions of students from the kind of abuse that nearly destroyed her. The former DuPont Charter Academy building had been converted into a community education center run by local activists rather than wealthy donors. Its marble halls now hosted GED programs, adult literacy classes, and legal clinics that served families who'd been failed by traditional educational institutions. The irony was intentional and satisfying. Judge Raina Ellison watched from the audience as her daughter addressed senators and civil rights leaders, her pride tempered by recognition of how much the last 6 months had cost them both. Death threats from McConnell supporters had required federal protection. Media attention had made normal teenage life impossible. Universities competed to offer Raina admission, but scholarship no longer mattered. When your college essay was featured on national news, Mom, Raina had said the night before, I know this isn't the life you wanted for me. The constant attention, the security concerns, the way people treat me like a symbol instead of a person. Baby Leela had replied, your grandmother used to say that some fights choose you, that justice sometimes requires sacrifices you never planned to make. But watching you transform pain into purpose, watching you turn your assault into advocacy, that's not the life I wanted for you. It's better. It's the life you chose for yourself. The media attention had brought unexpected consequences. Letters from students across the country Describing similar abuse at their institutions, federal investigations launched at dozens of schools, whose corruption had been hidden for decades. By wealth and political influence, congressional hearings that exposed the systematic nature of educational inequality. Leo Santos had been admitted to MIT. With a full scholarship, his hacking skills transformed from potential criminal liability into federal law enforcement credentials. Danica Reynolds had used her social media platform to highlight educational inequality. Her influence redirected from luxury products to social justice causes. Her father's plastic surgery empire had lost clients offended by her activism, but Danica had discovered that self-respect was more valuable than social status. The hardest part was realizing that privilege had made me complicit in systems that hurt people. But the best part was discovering that I could use that same privilege to fight for justice instead of protecting injustice. As the ceremony concluded, Raina felt her phone buzz with a text message from an unknown number. The kind of communication that had become routine since her case went national. Students from across the country reaching out for help with their own institutional battles. Dear Raina, I'm a junior at Wellington Prep in Connecticut, and they're doing the same things to scholarship students here that DuPont did to you, covering up assaults, protecting wealthy abusers, silencing victims with threats. I know you're probably tired of fighting, but we need help. Can you help us find our voices? Raina looked at her mother, who was reading the message over her shoulder, both understanding that their fight was far from over, that justice was not a destination, but a continuous journey that required constant vigilance and regular sacrifice. What do you think, baby? Judge Ellison asked. Are you ready for the next battle? Raina smiled, thinking about her grandmother's journal, about entries describing decades of small victories that had accumulated into generational change, about the legacy of resistance that had been passed down through bloodlines and struggle. She opened her phone and began typing her response, confident, clear, and uncompromising. I'm listening, and I'm ready to fight. Send me everything you have, and let's teach them that our voices can't be silenced by their money, our truth can't be buried by their influence, our justice can't be bought by their power. The revolution continues, and we're just getting started. As they left the Hart Building, Raina felt the weight of her transformation, from victimized teenager to national advocate, understanding that her name would be remembered, not as the librarian's daughter who got assaulted, but as the federal judge's daughter who refused to stay silent, who turned her trauma into triumph, who proved that institutional power was no match for moral courage. Backed by generational wisdom and uncompromising determination, the revolution had begun with a pair of hands around her throat, but it would continue with her voice raised in defiance, echoing across every institution where wealth protected privilege and power silenced truth, until justice finally prevailed over corruption and courage defeated complicity forever. Justice had found its voice, and it sounded like a 17-year-old girl who refused to be intimidated. Up next, we have more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.